Yours.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 9:30 on Thursday, the 19th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Emily Carver.
Sunak in Israel. The Prime Minister landed in the Middle East this morning for a 2-day visit to the region. Our reporter Charlie Peters will have the very latest from Tel Aviv.
As Rishi Sunak arrives in Israel, the question is, will he provide more support on the ground, or is this just a show of solidarity? The situation here escalating in the region, and there are hostages with British passports stuck in the Gaza Strip. What will Sunak do? We'll have all the latest from Tel Aviv.
And there's an aid crisis. The US President Joe Biden says Egypt will allow 20 aid trucks to cross the Rafah crossing, but only if the aid doesn't reach Hamas. Closer to home, King Charles issues a plea for mutual understanding in times of turmoil.
The temptation to turn ourselves into a shouting or recriminating society must be resisted.
Refugees welcome. Scotland's First Minister says the country is willing to take Gaza refugees, and there's pressure on the UK from Egypt to do so too. Would you welcome a refugee? GB News presenter Nigel Farage will join us to give his take.
And red weather warning. The UK's braced for the impact of Storm Babet. 70-mile-an-hour gusts and over 1 month's worth of rain could hit Scotland today. We'll send one unlucky reporter there to stand outside in it. And we'll see how many times we can say red weather warning like a tongue twister between now and midday. Get in touch with us this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here's your very latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning. It's coming up to 9:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Rishi Sunak's arrived in Israel on a two-day trip to the wider region amid growing concerns the conflict with Hamas could escalate. The Prime Minister will hold talks with his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as President Isaac Herzog. He'll be travelling to a number of other regional capitals in a diplomatic bid to prevent the fighting from spiralling. He'll also press for the route into Gaza to be open for the delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the exit of those trapped there.
To be here, it's an important time. It's important for me to be able to express my solidarity with the Israeli people following what was a horrific terrorist attack. Productive meetings ahead of us today. I'm looking forward to seeing the Prime Minister and President. There's lots of work for us to do.
Asylum seekers are set to return to the Bibi Stock home today. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Letters have been sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. Greta Thunberg has joined a protest outside JP Morgan in London, demanding the bank stop funding fossil fuels.
Emissions are rising, and so are we. Emissions are rising, and so are we.
The climate activists stood alongside Fossil-Free London at the entrance in Canary Wharf. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair at a meeting between oil executives. Ms Thunberg was arrested then, along with 26 others, and charged with a public order offence. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 p.m. this evening until tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. Power outages are expected, along with train cancellations up until Saturday. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, it's back to Emily and Beth.
Good morning, it's 9:34. This is Bev and Emily with you this morning until midday. So the Prime Minister has arrived in Israel for a two-day visit before heading to the region's capital.
Yes, Rishi Sunak will touch down in Israel. Well, he has touched down in Israel as the US President returns home from his own visit. Joe Biden urged Israel not to be consumed by rage.
Israel has been badly victimized, but, you know, the truth is that if they have an opportunity to relieve suffering of people who have nowhere to go, they're going to be, it's what they should do. And if they don't, they'll be held accountable. And my point to everyone is, look, if you have an opportunity to alleviate the pain, you should do it, period. And if you don't, you're going to lose credibility worldwide.
So what can Rishi Sunak hope to achieve on his visit? We're joined now by Charlie Peters on the ground in Tel Aviv. Good morning, Charlie. What can Rishi Sunak hope to achieve on this visit? Simple question.
Well, he'll want to establish more of an understanding about the situation in the Gaza Strip and Israel's plans for that possible invasion that we've heard. 9 Britons are missing in Israel, likely held in captivity by terrorists in North Gaza. They have possibly moved into the south amid those people fleeing from the north on the orders of the IDF. And there will be also a diplomatic effort to understand the situation there with other regional powers. We know that there are efforts going on with Qatar, a mediator between those in the Gaza Strip and the Western powers and Israel. The UK has a strong connection to the Qataris, who have acted in this way before on behalf of Western powers. Recently, also, the Qataris mediated a prisoner exchange between the Ukrainians and the Russians, so sort of the go-to hostage exchange power in the region. And so Rishi Sunak will be seeking to understand and engage with those powers, but he'll also be particularly keen on the wider regional situation here. We've had unconfirmed reports in the last hour that a US military base in northern Syria has been targeted by rockets from a Iranian-aligned terrorist group. Yesterday, the US confirmed that 2 bases in Iraq, Al-Assad and Al-Harir, were hit by drone strikes, with a US military personnel being evacuated with a traumatic brain injury. So an escalating situation there, which is rare. We have not seen these sorts of strikes on US and coalition forces in the area for some time. If you cast your mind back to January 2020, when Donald Trump ordered the strike on Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani, a general in the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that set off a wave of drone strikes and missile strikes on American bases and coalition bases in the region. That led also to the death of a British soldier, a medic posted in northern Iraq. And as we're seeing these strikes occurring again, not at the same rate seen since that time, I think that Rishi Sunak will be urgently trying to understand how to quell those raising tensions in the region. But I have to say, from Israel, it doesn't look like they are likely to go down anytime soon. The Arab powers this morning are resolute in their understanding of what happened on Tuesday night in North Gaza, where that was that reported hospital explosion. The Israelis have explained what they believe happened there. Their evidence has been put forward. Yesterday, the US intelligence agencies and Joe Biden came out in support of the Israeli side. The British are still checking. And this morning, the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, said they are waiting until they have a very clear picture of the situation. So will they stand by Israel in their assessment of that attack? Will that help Britain to engage with the Arab powers? These questions still need to be asked, but British lives at risk and British interests very much at risk throughout Israel and the wider region. A very precarious situation here for the Prime Minister.
OK, thank you, Charlie. Can I just ask you one quick question? What is life like in Israel at the moment, in Tel Aviv? Is it relatively peaceful? Are there people going about their business, visiting cafes, restaurants, shops, etc.?
There's not an awful lot about that. It's quite hard to be peaceful when rocket attacks are so regular on central Israel. People are on a state of high alert, and yesterday was relatively quiet until about 7 p.m. when Joe Biden left, where suddenly there was a flurry of rocket attacks. We spent a couple of hours in and out of the bomb shelters here. No, this isn't a happy place. This is not a place of peace and restaurants and cafes. People here are also returning from the front lines, and they're also returning from the atrocities committed on October the 7th in the south. Last night, the Israelis arrested another terrorist in the south of Israel. They haven't yet secured the entire country, it seems. People here are traumatized and also fear what is going to come next. Could they be struck by Lebanese Hezbollah? Could more rockets land in this central city? Concerns are very high.
OK, all right, thank you, Charlie. We'll come back to you later. It's interesting that, because I was talking to somebody yesterday who came back from Tel Aviv, and they were saying that actually they know roughly when there might be a missile coming, or they get a warning, or that they are running out of speed by the time they land in the area. But actually, people aren't visiting cafes and restaurants because of the risk of lone wolf Hamas terrorists just coming into a public place, maybe with a weapon of some kind. We're going to be talking in a moment about whether you think that Rishi Sunak should be there today. We are going to have a little debate about that as well. We've got Arlene Foster's going to be joining us in just a moment as well to talk about that. But let us know at home what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Yes, well, speaking last night at a dinner in the City of London, King Charles stressed the importance of mutual understanding between religions during these turbulent times.
One of my first acts as sovereign a little over a year ago was to open the doors of Buckingham Palace to the leaders of the major faiths represented across these islands, to welcome them with respect and indeed love, and to rededicate my life to protecting the space for faith itself within our shores. Such understanding, both at home and overseas, is never more vital than at times of international turmoil and heartbreaking loss of life.
Well, somebody who knows a lot about religious division and times of trauma is Arlene Foster, former leader of the DUP. Morning, Arlene. Good to see you. Just from a sort of the fate of humanity point of view, given your experience and your history and your understanding of troubles in Northern Ireland, what do you make of events of this week?
Well, you know, sometimes the human loss gets lost in all of the diplomacy and the chat about what happens next. You know, people have moved on. Understandably, when you're in politics, you're looking at the bigger picture, you're trying to work out. But I was just really struck this morning when I was going through Twitter, and I noticed a tweet from Israel where a young boy, probably around 10, had just buried his mum and dad and his 2 sisters. His entire family wiped out by Hamas, and here he was alone at the funeral. I just think that's incredible. And the scale, the barbarity, the savagery of what happened on that Saturday is just incredible. And we're still finding things out about it. People are still being held hostage. I think up to 8 people from the UK are being held hostage in Gaza at this present moment in time. In the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, it's really all anybody wants to speak about at the moment. People are really very concerned about the hostages that are there, the trauma that they're going through. So we shouldn't lose that humanity piece, and obviously that's the case for those who have lost loved ones in Israel, and of course what's happening in Gaza at this present moment in time as well.
Arlene, can I ask you about the situation here? We just heard from King Charles saying that we need, well, essentially harmony and unity between religions across the world, but here in the UK, most importantly. Front page of the Times this morning, Robin Simcox, he's a commissioner for countering extremism. He said Britain has become a permissive environment for anti-Israel extremism and anti-Semitism because of mass migration and poor integration. How does any government begin to deal with that?
And the interesting thing is he's an independent commissioner, so he's not part of the government structure. He's independent. He is going to say today that he's concerned about extremism here in the UK. He's worried about what's going to happen domestically here in terms of terrorism. And that's actually echoed by the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, who's actually meeting his Five Eyes partners, you know, the United States, Canada, Australia, and America and New Zealand at the minute, and they're having discussions about intelligence, and that's reassuring for me that that's going on. But what Ken McCallum is actually saying is it has always been the case that lots of would-be terrorists in the UK draw inspiration through their distorted understanding of what is happening in other countries. So there's a real concern in intelligence at the moment about what's going to happen here in the UK, and I'm not alarming people, but I think they should be reassured that we're keeping an eye on these would-be terrorists, and we're alert to the risk.
Do you think we need to bear that in mind also in this conversation, this debate that seems to be coming our way? Well, it started already about whether we should accept refugees from Gaza. Do you worry there that there is a national security risk if we were to do that?
Well, I think the national security risk has to be front and centre, because the first duty of government is to protect its citizens, and therefore we have to be concerned about people coming from other jurisdictions. Already there are people in the UK who would seek to cause violence and who would seek to be terrorists, and therefore we should be concerned about others who would come in as well. Of course we want to help. Of course we want to have humanitarian concern for people across the world and to be a leader in this respect. However, we do need to look after our own people as well.
Rishi Sunak obviously is there today, Arlene, and Emily and I slightly disagree on this, because I see no real reason for him to be there. I don't want taxpayers' money being spent on him being there. I don't want the Israeli authorities to have to protect him when they have rather a lot to deal with at the moment anyway. Does he need to be there, in your opinion?
Yes, he does need to be there, because it's about taking a leadership role in the world for the UK. And you'll recall when the Ukrainian war started, and I'm sure President Zelensky is concerned at the moment, there's a lot of attention on the Middle East. Not much talk about Ukraine at this present moment in time. I'm sure he's worried about that. That's one of the opportunity costs of what's happening in the Middle East. It's about taking a leadership role. Rishi Sunak has been very clear about his condemnation of terrorism. Now he's going to try and use his office to broker some sort of moving forward piece, and I think that is important. That the UK...
Why do we need it's so important, though, to show that solidarity with Israel alone in the Middle East as a state under attack from a terrorist organisation. It's so important that Rishi Sunak shows that we are in solidarity with them.
I think he can do that from here, though. So just why do we, the UK, need to take a leadership role in this situation in the Middle East?
I take a leadership role in anything. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if we want our nation to be at the forefront, then we need our leaders.
Forefront of what, though?
The forefront of leading in the world. I mean, I don't want to be a second-rate country. I want our leader to go out and say, we're here to help. But we are the bastion of democracy.
It's standing up for liberal democracy.
And we are yes, exactly. We are standing up against terrorism globally, because we know not only internationally is it right to stand up against terrorism, Well,
you see, here's the thing. We are broke. We have nothing in the coffers at the moment here. People are extremely concerned about domestic matters at the moment, and the fact that we don't seem to be able to get a handle on anything from an economic point of view, with the fuel bills going up. I'm just not sure there's the appetite to see Rishi Sunak going over there and doing what exactly? I would presume that everything that could be done from a diplomatic point of view could be done here.
No, you're wrong, because politics is the art of looking people in the eye and having those conversations, actually. It's not the big conferences that bring about peace. It's the conversations over a coffee. It's the conversations that, you know, how can we find a way to make this right? And that happens in face-to-face dialogue.
This issue is so entrenched. This is... you cannot...
Well, you could say the same about Northern Ireland. It's so entrenched. I mean, you have to find solutions. You have to keep optimistic. If you're a politician, it's about the art of the possible. So despite all of the horrific things that have happened in Israel, despite the fact that families have been wiped out by Hamas, we have to look forward.
Also, I think
it's
important for families in this country who may have missing children, missing relatives in Israel. It's just fundamentally important. What he will achieve in terms of policy, we don't know. But we saw how President Biden seems to have helped in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of opening that border, although I don't believe it's been opened yet, but moving in that direction. No, you're not convinced, are you, Bev?
And let me say this as well. When you're in a situation where the world is against you, and Israel often finds itself in that situation, they need others to come in and help them to move in a particular direction. So you make the issue a bigger issue, that it's not just Israel, that others are worried about what's happening in the region. And I think the UK and the US have a huge role to play in helping us move forward. And I absolutely agree that our Prime Minister needs to be there.
OK, well, it's fascinating. And as I say, nobody knows more about these sorts of difficult conflicts, Arlene, than you do, and how to navigate them going forward. I'd love to know what you think at home. GBViews.
Yes, I am very interested to see whether this divides the inbox.
I just think the British public want Rishi Sunak to be dealing with what's happening here while supporting, I do believe, the Jewish communities fully in this country. I want to see him visiting Jewish schools, synagogues. That, for me, would be how he shows his support.
He can do both.
Right.
Time for me to leave.
Lovely to see you, Arlene, as
Bye,
always.
Arlene.
Right, 60 Tory MPs are demanding that Sadiq Khan bans protests at the Cenotaph after the pro-Palestine activists sparked outrage last weekend.
Yes, a stage for the Palestine Solidarity campaign, and speakers including Jeremy Corbyn was placed directly next to the memorial for Britain's war dead. That was on Saturday.
So we're joined now by immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson. Good morning, Ivan. Good to see you, as always. Do you think it was appropriate that memorial, that the stage for these speakers, this pro-Palestine rally, was allowed to take place directly upon, actually, not even next to the memorial, but the stage was built around the Cenotaph, a statue against fascism?
I think there's a balance between the right of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, protected by Article 12 of the Convention, and then those who do acts that incite violence or hatred towards others. So there is a balance, but I do think that we have strong enough laws to prosecute those that do that, and we should allow people to have free speech and to demonstrate. Otherwise, you attack the very basis of our democracy.
Ivan, do you think we should be concerned, though, as a society, to see foreign conflicts mobilise people in this way on our streets in the UK? It's very troubling to many people.
Look, we live in a multicultural society, especially in London. So if you expect people who come from different backgrounds, different countries, not to be affected by what's going on in their own country, I think we're being a bit naive. I think people are doing protests where they've got family members there and they've got reasons to protest.
We had Suella Braverman recently, Home Secretary, saying that actually multiculturalism has not worked in this country. Some would say that these protests are another demonstration of that. It is more division on the streets of London.
I disagree. Look at our cabinet. I mean, that's an effect of multiculturalism in this country.
Ivan, I would argue that that is the effect of good integration into British society. The problem that we're seeing and what Suella Braverman, I believe, was highlighting was examples like what we're seeing now, a division between Jewish communities being targeted by other communities in this country. That was the concern. So yes, people from ethnic minorities are able to get to the top of society, which is fantastic, but that doesn't mean there aren't conflicts bubbling under the surface, and we see them on the surface, don't we, with this kind of thing?
I think the rhetoric of Suella Braverman pours fuel on these conflicts. I think the role of the government is to bring communities together. And recently, Justin Welby held a conference with the Jewish leaders, the Muslim leaders, and other faiths. And that's what the government should be doing. Instead of ramping up the rhetoric, divisive comments of the Home Secretary, it's not helpful.
Ivor, obviously when the Ukraine invasion happened, the British people opened their doors to Ukrainian refugees. It was a very successful system. There are similar calls now to welcome refugees from Gaza. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I do think it's a very good idea, because it's a safe, legal route that we've been calling for the last 2 years. So we should take our fair share of refugees when these conflicts occur around the world.
Ivan, sorry to interrupt, but the counter to that is that it is a terrorist hotspot in Gaza, and that there could be the potential for national security concerns here as a result of taking people from Gaza. Also, Arab countries nearby seem to be closing their doors as well. I think you'd struggle to get popularity in this country for that kind of policy, Ivan.
Well, it's not always about popularity, is it? It's about doing the right thing.
Well, I'm sorry, but the government is there to serve the UK people, is it not?
Yes, and apply the laws. So if somebody's a genuine refugee and wants to claim asylum here, we should have safe routes to do that. Look, Lebanon has 22% of its population as refugees. We have 0.6%. It's just a complete lie to say we've been overrun with refugees. It's just simply not true.
OK. Well, we could have potentially 1 million people displaced, of course, from Palestine. We're going to have to bring this up with you another day, Ivan. We've run out of time. I'm so sorry. Still to come today. It's good to see you, Ivan. We're going to be joined by Nigel Farage for his take on whether we should open our doors to these refugees. This is Britain's Newsroom.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Babet moves north through today, bringing wet and windy weather to many places, but truly exceptional rainfall to eastern Scotland with the risk of widespread and significant flooding. That's why there is a red warning for later today and into tomorrow for eastern Scotland. The rain's setting in during the next few hours and it remains heavy and persistent across much of Scotland, particularly in the east, through the next couple of days. Further south, it dries up for Northern Ireland eventually. England and Wales predominantly seeing a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Some of these showers will be heavy, although it will be a mild day, 17 or 18 Celsius in the south, 12 to 13 further north, but the wind picks up strength through the day, 70 or 80 mile-per-hour wind gusts for exposed parts of central and northern Scotland. That wind coming in from the southeast, it's an unusual direction for Scotland, so the wettest conditions will be in the east rather than the west, and by Friday we'll see accumulations up to 150 and in some exposed parts of Aberdeenshire and Angus 200 or 250 millimetres. That's more than a month's worth of rain in just a few days. That would cause widespread flooding, transport disruption and a danger to life. That's why there is a red warning in force. It's going to stay wet and windy in the north, and further south another bout of wet weather moves in. That could affect southeast England through the day on Friday with 50 or even 75 millimetres in places. So very unsettled next few days.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time! Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning. It's 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 19th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver and Bev Turner.
So Sunak in Israel, the Prime Minister, has landed in the Middle East this morning for a 2-day visit to the region.
Aid to arrive. The US President Joe Biden says Egypt will allow 20 aid trucks to cross the Rafah crossing, but only if the aid doesn't reach Hamas. Closer to home, King Charles issues a plea for mutual understanding in times of turmoil.
The temptation to turn ourselves into a shouting or recriminating society must be resisted.
Refugees welcome. Scotland's First Minister says the country is willing to take Gaza refugees, and there is pressure on the UK from Egypt to do the same. So would you welcome a refugee into your home? GB News presenter Nigel Farage will join us shortly to give us his take.
And the Bibby barge is back. After a string of false starts, the Home Office is now expected to return asylum seekers to the accommodation vessel. Jeff Moody has the latest.
Yes, I'll be live all morning from Portland and Dorset. We're expecting the first of the refugees to return to the Bibby Stockholm in the next couple of hours.
And if you're watching on TV, we're seeing that delightful weather where Jeff Moody is this morning. We've got some terrible weather coming with Storm Babet. We're going to be discussing that as well. Get in touch with us, gbviews@gbnews.com. We're also discussing whether Rishi Sunak should be in the Middle East. Do you want him to be there, or does he have more important matters at home to deal with? gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here's Rhiannon Jones with your news.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Rishi Sunak's arrived in Israel on a two-day trip to the wider region amid growing concerns the conflict with Hamas could escalate. The Prime Minister will hold talks with his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as President Isaac Herzog. He'll be travelling to a number of other regional capitals in a diplomatic bid to prevent the fighting from spiralling. He'll also press for the route into Gaza to be open for the delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the safe exit of those trapped in the territory.
To be here, it's an important time. It's important for me to be able to express my solidarity with the Israeli people following what was a horrific terrorist attack. Productive meetings ahead of us today. I'm looking forward to seeing the Prime Minister and President. There's lots of work for us to do.
His visit follows that of US President Joe Biden, who says Egypt's President Sisi has agreed to open the Rafah crossing to allow trucks of aid into Gaza. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The UN has warned that life-saving aid for those trapped in Gaza is vital as Palestinians dig survivors out of rubble and search for safety. Benjamin Netanyahu says he won't stop food, water and medicine from being delivered to civilians in the south, but that there'll be no humanitarian aid from Israel without the return of hostages. Meanwhile, the airstrikes continue. The Gaza Health Ministry says almost 3,500 Palestinians have been killed and just over 12,000 injured so far. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News peace for the Palestinians is paramount.
I think we've got to recognise that the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinian people. We've seen people in Gaza over the last 30, 40 years, not just murdered when Hamas took power in 2008-9, but actually since then being exploited in the most horrific ways. We've seen children being forced to dig these tunnels that sadly have been dug across the entire region. We've seen individuals who have stood against Hamas in various different ways being murdered.
The Foreign Secretary's held talks with his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. James Cleverly visited Israel last week and will travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to discuss the conflict and seek a peaceful resolution. The UK says the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages and allow humanitarian access to Gaza. In other news back here, asylum seekers are set to return to the Bibi Stockholm later. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Food supplies have now been delivered and letters sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. The Met Office has described new facial recognition technology to catch prolific shoplifters as game-changing. In a pilot of the new software, 12 retailers provided images of 30 of the worst offenders. When compared with the force's custody shots, almost half came up as positive matches. Those offenders are now being investigated with a view to build criminal cases. The software uses biometric measures of a person's face, even if it's partly covered. Greta Thunberg has joined a protest outside JP Morgan in London, demanding the bank stop funding fossil fuels.
The oceans are rising, and so are we. The oceans are rising, and so are we.
The climate activists joined Fossil Free London at the entrance in Canary Wharf. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair outside a meeting between oil executives, where Ms Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others and charged with a public order offence. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life. from 6 p.m. this evening until tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. Power outages are expected, along with train cancellations until Saturday. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Bev and Emily.
Good morning, it's 10:06. Now, we've been asking you whether you think Rishi Sunak should be going out to Israel, and you've been emailing at home. Thank you so much. Jane has said, we don't need a leader in world events that we don't know enough about. Stay out of other people's wars. We have problems here. Sort them out.
Yes, but another Jane decided to agree. Well, she agrees with me and Arlene. She says, it's very important for Great Britain and America to show allegiance to Israel and try to look after those who are held and trapped in Gaza by the terrorists. And Alan says, of course Sunak needs to be in Israel. He needs to show support to the Israeli government, people and the relatives of Israeli people living in the UK. He's surprised, Bev. You're questioning it.
I like surprising people. That's right. He goes on to say the enormity of what Hamas has done is jaw-dropping, can have a catastrophic effect on world peace. I couldn't agree more. It's horrific. We have to remember the events that happened on Saturday, October the 7th. In a way, we're sort of moving ahead with that, and we still haven't really. The Jewish community are expected to just move on now to talk about war, the brutality of that day. But Julia says, good morning, GB News. Great to see Arlene on, giving her thoughts. Brilliant interview, thank you. The PM should be an Israeli, has to show himself support. And Joanne says we shouldn't be leading this Middle East fight. We've been let down badly. Our safety is at risk, and it's naive for our leaders to pretend otherwise.
Can I just say one more thing? Phil, I think he's spot on here. He says it's absolutely right for Rishi to go to Israel. The symbolism and show of support is everything. It means a hell of a lot to the Israelis, and that's what gets me. That's why I'm in favour of him being there.
Well, I'm prepared to be proven wrong, as I always do, but keep your emails coming in. So the Prime Minister has arrived in Israel for this two-day visit before heading to the regional capitals.
But what can he actually do?
Well, we're going to go live now to Charlie in Tel Aviv. Good morning, Charlie. For people who are just tuning in just after 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, what is it Rishi Sunak hoping to achieve? Is it, as one of our viewers has said, merely or primarily a symbolic act to have him there representing the UK?
I think a significant portion of this visit is one of solidarity. Much of what Israel needs, Britain cannot provide. Since this war started, there has been a rise in British military capabilities in the area, and they are using maritime patrol aircraft, spy planes over the region to support with the Israeli war effort, particularly over the Gaza Strip. But there are also UK interests, obviously, engaged here, in particular those hostages in the Gaza Strip, some 9 Britons missing since the start of this war. That will be a key focus of the British diplomatic effort, and Rishi Sunak will be raising that directly with Israeli political leaders. There is also engagement with the Qataris, who are understood to be acting as mediators between Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the Western powers and other nations that have people under captivity in Hamas. Some 40 nationalities understood to be under captivity. And the Israelis this morning raised the number of hostages in the Gaza Strip to 203, a very significant number in this unprecedented wave of violence. But there is also diplomatic relations here regarding the humanitarian situation. As Mr. Sunak is in Jerusalem meeting with those Israeli leaders, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, right now is meeting with his counterparts in Egypt, where they will no doubt be discussing the crossing of humanitarian aid from Egypt through that Rafah crossing into Gaza, where the IDF said yesterday that they had established a humanitarian safe zone off the coast in Al-Mawazi, some kilometres east of the Yunus Khan Centre, where there has been significant bombing and a humanitarian crisis with people fleeing from the north to the south. Those are the main focuses of British diplomacy today. But when it comes to actual direct action and support of the Israeli war effort, that's really more Washington's bag.
OK, thank you very much, Charlie. We'll be going back to Charlie live as this story develops, of course, today. We are joined in the studio by GB News presenter and Conservative MP for Tatton, Esther McVey. Esther, great to see you. Right. What's your position on this, whether Rishi Sunak should be there or not? I think I probably know what you're going to say.
No, I absolutely believe he should be there. You're talking about solidarity, Western leaders standing together against acts of terrorism, but it's more than that. And these face-to-face meetings can get into how how about the humanitarian support, what you're going to do there. They can also talk about how the ground invasion needs to be nuanced. So I think they are vital.
But surely there are teams that we don't know of, diplomatic teams behind the scenes who are having those conversations without Rishi Sunak necessarily having to be there.
Oh, yes, you always need the leader there. Of course, the teams will be there, but to show that you mean it. And yes, it's exhausting for a Prime Minister to meet the people, which he did in this country, all those communities, go to schools, but to fly out there is important. These are trusted allies. Who can possibly be a restraining influence in one way? Who can negotiate with other people? And you saw after the attack on the hospital that Jordan summit was cancelled, and we need those Arab leaders around the table. So, you know, I think that Rishi's diary will be fluid because he'll be trying to get those people back together. He'll be wanting to speak to the leader, the president of Egypt. He'll be wanting to speak to Jordan, the leaders there, and maybe the Palestinian leader too, because you're going to have to see how do we move on and get a path to peace.
Knowing his character, does that play to his strengths?
Yes, it does, actually. He is far more of a diplomat. He's not what some people might think of a very outspoken, as Boris was, leader. He's not. He's the absolute opposite to that. He is much more of a diplomat. Diplomacy comes easy to him. He listens as much as he speaks, and that will be needed.
And, of course, the missing Brits, I believe it is 9 Brits that are still missing, thought to perhaps be taken into Gaza as hostages or whatever else. But that will obviously come up in conversations in Israel.
It will be all of the hostages. Yeah. How do you go about to get those releases? How do you make sure we move to peace rather than making the incident even more serious than it is?
Esther, can I ask you about something that is very controversial, but it is on the minds of many of our viewers and listeners, the idea of taking refugees from Gaza. In my mind, national security in this country must come first, especially considering some Arab nations are very much closing their doors.
So what are your question being?
Well, should we accept refugees from Gaza?
Well, I actually don't think we should be. I do think those closest, like Egypt, should be looking to take the refugees in. I look at the incidents at home. We're saying at the moment we're 4 million homes short for the people who are in the UK. We have taken in, and rightly so, we've supported people, whether it's from Syria, whether it's from Afghanistan, whether it's from Hong Kong, whether it's from Ukraine. We have opened our doors. But I think on this instance, I think we're going to have to say, no, we can't. And I think that's something else Rishi needs to do. I do believe the Arab states need to be doing more in the region, and I think Egypt should be looking to take in the refugees from Gaza.
I mean, Egypt have basically said, we're not. And they said, you know...
So why should the UK?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? And I think one of the things that this particular conflict has brought home to me is how few of those Arab states do take other Arab refugees, how few people they do take, and when we are incredibly generous. You know, and actually, how do we put more pressure on those Arab countries to take more people who are in need? Vast, not densely populated countries that have incredible wealth and natural resources, and yet they don't appear to be as welcoming to people like those who will be leaving from Gaza as we are.
And that, again, is the diplomacy or the nudging along in a certain direction that Rishi will need to do while he's out there. But it wasn't just him. You know, Biden has helped, I do believe, the opening of the Rafah entrance from Egypt to get humanitarian aid over. So I think each person who goes along, each leader from the Western world should try and push this in a way.
Now, Esther, another thing that's concerning people, and I just want to put this quote to you, really. This is a commissioner for countering extremism on the front of the Times, says Britain has become a permissive environment for anti-Israel extremism and anti-Semitism, and he says this is because of mass immigration and poor integration. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think we've got to make sure, and this has been raised many times, about the integration. You know, if you're going to have and people understand multiculturalism in very different ways, but if you are going to accept people, there is an obligation on people who come to this country also to integrate with the culture of this country too. So we've got to make sure we do that. But equally, that's another reason I think Rishi needs to be out in Israel, speaking and negotiating and using this diplomacy out there, because it does have impacts back at home as we see the different communities being, how can we say, stirred up. I mean, Hamas planned this war for 2 years. When Hamas went in and attacked brutally, did a terrorist attack on Israel, don't tell me they didn't know what the repercussions was going to be from Israel to the people in Gaza, and yet they went ahead with it. They knew Israel would use its military might to stop what went on, and it went ahead. So I think they are playing a very canny game. The world needs to wake up, because we are all integrated societies, and we don't need our own people turning on one another through the grief and through the death that they're seeing on the streets.
And on that issue, do you think it was appropriate for Sadiq Khan to give permission to the protests, which are the celebrations at the cenotaph at the weekend, with a warning from the organiser of that this will happen every single weekend until the war ends?
Look, we are a fair and open country, and we do allow people to express themselves freely. It is if you go above and beyond expressing your sympathies and your upset to actually trying to evoke some sort of reaction or exacerbate the situation, that we have to stop it. And that's why I do believe Rishi needs to be out there trying to get some diplomatic solutions, because that's what the world needs.
Do you think he should be saying to the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, you cannot have these protests every single weekend, bringing the centre of London to a standstill and having people celebrating what was... we have to draw a distinction between the peace-loving Palestinian people and Hamas. I know that's important. But should he be saying to him, you can't have these protests every weekend on the cenotaph?
We might well have to say that.
Yeah.
Equally, the police need to feel emboldened that if people are not doing a peaceful protest, but if people are trying to excite and incite some sort of hatred, they need to be closed down and stopped.
60 Conservative MPs are demanding just that Sadiq Khan bans these protests around the cenotaph. So we'll see what comes of that.
Esther, good to see you. Thank you so much. You on telly at the weekend?
I am 10 to 12 with my other half.
On Saturday morning here on GB News. Now, still to come, we're going to be asking Nigel Farage if he thinks that Britain should take in any of the 1 million people fleeing Gaza. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, it is 10:22. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver and Bev Turner. We're currently looking at pictures of Sderot on the left and on the right, the Lebanon border. As you can see, all seems quite still, apart from a plume of smoke you can see there by the Lebanon border. We're going to be bringing you all the updates as they come from Israel, from Gaza, as they happen.
That's right, and also, of course, Rishi Sunak is there today. We may be taking some footage of him live throughout the morning. So, Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, said he is willing to take Gaza refugees, and there's pressure from Egypt for the UK to do the same. Some would say it's our moral duty, of course.
So would you welcome a Gaza refugee into your home? We did so with Ukrainian refugees. We're joined by GB News' own Nigel Farage to discuss this. Nigel, your thoughts. What do you make of Humza Yousaf's comments that Scotland is open to refugees from Gaza?
Well, it might be for him, but I don't suppose for one moment it is the majority of Scottish people. I mean, look, since the Brexit referendum, we've taken in over 500,000. They've come from Syria, they've come from Pakistan, they've come from Hong Kong, they've come from Ukraine, and we keep being told, well, these are exceptional circumstances. Well, here's yet another exceptional circumstance. So firstly, in terms of sheer numbers, I think we just got to say enough's enough. And secondly, isn't it interesting that Egypt won't take any refugees from Gaza? Do you know why? Because they don't want to import terrorism into Egypt, just as Saudi Arabia didn't take a single person after the Syrian conflicts. So if their neighbours are not prepared to take any, I frankly don't see why we should do so. And, you know, when you get this morning an independent report, a line to the Home Office with independent, says we already have a problem of integration being poor because of mass migration. Well, how many more people do we want marching on the streets of London, demonstrating? There is actually a cultural element to this that I think is very important. So we've always been a very generous country, but if the rest of the Arab states aren't prepared to help, why on earth should we?
Nigel, I think it's really important as well to point out that most Muslims who live in this country are peaceful, they are kind people, they don't wish any harm on other people. But we have failed, perhaps, to recognise a sort of existential threat, you might say, of radical extremist Muslim jihads, and the threat that they pose to a Western way of life here. Who would you hold culpable for that, which could at best be perhaps naivety, maybe, if we're being generous? Who do you lay the blame Blair to some degree?
Yeah, not your viewers. Not your viewers. The Labour and Conservative parties who lie to the British public at every, and it's a strong word, but I mean it, they lie to the British public at every general election, telling them numbers coming into Britain, sheer numbers coming into Britain, will be under control and will go down. And we're now at record levels of legal net migration, at huge numbers, as I've said already, of refugees coming since 2016. And that's before you even start to talk about the young men from very different cultures crossing the English Channel. We have, I mean, the first duty of a British government is to put the safety and security of the country and its own people first. And if you allow millions of people in who come from cultures that are very different from ours, with whom we have very little in common, it's no surprise that we've got these massive problems of integration.
Oh, Nigel, I just want to ask you whether you believe politicians have forgotten who they're working for. Surely, when it comes to immigration policy, it should be about what the British people want and need, and national security should be top of the government's agenda. For someone like Humza Yousaf, it appears that he is more concerned about supposed international humanitarian duties, but not really necessarily about what the Scottish people want.
Look, I mean, frankly, there is no issue on which our main political parties all around the UK and the populace are further apart. I can promise you, if there was a national referendum held on how many people should come to Britain legally, on what we should do with those that come illegally, and how many people we should take from war zones around the world, we would get a very different result to that is produced by the Westminster Parliament and indeed the Scottish Parliament.
Nigel, we've been debating this morning the relative merits of Rishi Sunak being out there, the cost of him going there to the British taxpayer, but also to the Israelis who are having to keep him safe while he's there, and the benefit that he might bring on that trip. Where do you stand on it?
Well, cost is a very marginal point here. I mean, we are at a moment where there is a real danger of major escalation in the Middle East, which could profoundly affect the lives of all of us around the world. I think it's right that Rishi Sunak. I'm very surprised how little has been said about the British citizens that have been killed, or should I say murdered, and the British citizens that are still being held hostage. It's almost as if we've forgotten about these people. Well, I certainly haven't. And I absolutely hope that top of Sunak's list is finding out what the plan is to extract our people who are being held hostage right now. I understand a detachment of the SAS is on its way, but also worth noting that the Americans yesterday, well, Biden's always a bit jumbly and stumbly, but he was perfectly clear that American intelligence said that the bombing of the hospital came from a misfired Hamas rocket. Absolutely clear. That's what the American intelligence believes, and that's now actually what most of the world believes. And yet Rishi Sunak refused to be drawn on that, refused to say earlier on, look, let's be clear, this was a Hamas misfire. And I wonder why he's running away from that. Is it that he fears even bigger street protests on the cities of our country?
Yes, well, Nigel, earlier we spoke to human rights lawyer Ivan Sampson about the question of whether we should take in refugees from Gaza. Have a listen to this and then can you react to what he says for us?
If somebody's a genuine refugee and wants to claim asylum here, we should have safe routes to do that. Look, Lebanon has 22% of its population as refugees. We have 0.6%. I mean, it's just a complete lie to say we've been overrun with refugees. It's just simply not true.
OK. We could... Go on, Nigel, your reaction to that.
Well, we're not Lebanon. We are the United Kingdom. We have, I mean, look at it. We're putting people on barges. We're filling up over 400 hotels around the country. If Ivan Sampson is saying we don't have a problem with housing people, whether they're genuine refugees or people illegally crossing the channel, then frankly, he's in cloud cuckoo land. And I think all through the centuries, there is no country in the world who has actually got a finer record of genuinely helping those in. We've done more than our fair share over the course of the last few years. Enough is enough. And Ivan, if you listen to the UNHCR, There are up to 80 million people around the world displaced. How many millions does Ivan think should come? I'd love to know the answer.
Yeah. Okay.
They never have an answer to that.
No, it's always one that's slightly dodged. But Nigel, thank you so much. Nigel will be on your screens, of course, at 7 o'clock tonight here on GB News. Keep your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com.
Yes, still to come. King Charles stressed the importance of mutual understanding between religions during turbulent times.
And revoking visas, former Home Secretary Sajid Javid is calling for foreign nationals committing acts of anti-Semitism or other hate crimes in the UK to have their visas revoked. Do you agree with that? That and much more after your morning's news with Rhiannon.
Good morning, it's 10:31, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister's met with families whose loved ones are being held hostage by Hamas following the attacks on Israel on October the 7th. Rishi Sunak can be seen hugging a woman on a social media post with the caption, "To have a child taken from you is the parents' worst nightmare." Rishi Sunak's in Israel meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well as President Isaac Herzog. He'll also press for the route into Gaza to be open for the delivery of humanitarian aid as well as the safe exit of those trapped in the territory.
To be here, it's an important time. It's important for me to be able to express my solidarity with the Israeli people following what was a horrific terrorist attack. Productive meetings ahead of us today. I'm looking forward to seeing the Prime Minister and President. There's lots of work for us to do.
Back here, asylum seekers are set to return to the Bibi Stockholm today. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Letters have been sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. Greta Thunberg has joined a protest outside JP Morgan in London, demanding the bank stop funding fossil fuels. The oceans are rising, and so are we. The oceans are rising, and so are we. The climate activist is with Fossil-Free London at the entrance in Canary Wharf. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair at a meeting between oil executives where Ms Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others and charged with a public order offence. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 p.m. this evening and tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. Power outages are expected, along with train cancellations until Saturday. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Still to come this morning, we're going to be joined by GB News' political editor and very popular new member of our team, Christopher Hope, with the latest on Sunak's 2-day trip to Israel. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Don't go.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Right, it's 10:37. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver and Bev Turner. We're currently looking at pictures of Sderot on the left of your screen, and on the right-hand side, we've got the Lebanon border there. As you can see, all looks calm at the moment. There are a couple of plumes of smoke there on the right-hand side. That's by the Lebanon border. We know that there continue to be strikes and bombardments there. We'll bring you any updates from Israel and from Gaza and the Lebanon border as they happen.
Right. We've got our guest in the studio. Sam Lister is with us this morning from the Daily Express, and Carol Malone as well, hence all the news and the sort of, you know, the chaos and the papers and the chat.
The rustling.
Right, ladies, let's start with King Charles and his speech last night, talking about bringing people together. What did he say, Carol, and why does it matter at a time like this?
It wasn't. It kind of was what he said, but it was kind of the way he said it. He did what his mother would have done. He's trying to keep calm. This was at his Mansion House speech, and you know, Charles is infamous for meddling politically.
Yeah.
We know that. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to go there and say something, and it's going to be World War III. and he wasn't like that at all. He was just really measured, and he said things like, he said, you know, we must not become a shouting, discriminatory society. He talked about the propaganda war raging on social media and said that can cause massive problems. He warned about the dangers. He warned about this war, you know, on social media. And he said he called for civility and tolerance amid rising tensions over Gaza, over the hospital bombings. And I just thought, this is good. He's not taking any side. He's doing exactly what the Queen would have done. And I'm sure that one of her greatest fears with Charles being king was that he would cause an international incident. And this would be the place not to do that. And I thought he was brilliant. And he also talked about, how, when he moved off Gaza, he talked about people had to speak freely, which is a subject that was very dear to our hearts here. He said, you know, people keep on talking about their rights, but they also have to consider their personal responsibilities, both to each other and to communities.
That's interesting.
And I just thought, my God, you know, you really sound like a grown-up here. I know that sounds patronising, he's 70, but I just thought he was doing the job of monarch very well.
Yeah, and he even made a bit of a joke, didn't he, Sam, about himself, and he said we have to be able to laugh at ourselves, and which anybody who's seen the, what did he say, the vicissitudes of unpredictable fountain pens that I've had to deal with, about him losing his temper signing various things. It was, the tone was right, like Carol says, it brought people together.
I think so, and he talked about the UK being a community of communities, and obviously what we've seen is that this is not just about the Middle East, this is about the repercussions that are happening all over the world, Western world, you know, America here. And we've seen, obviously, great tensions. There are very, very angry protests, and essentially he's trying to calm that. He's looking at the impact on the UK and trying to bring that down a notch, and I think that is very, very welcome. I think it is interesting, though, he does, and I know we're going to go on to talk about this, but he does refer to Hamas as terrorists. I think if the King can do that, then
the BBC should be able to do that. Well, let's move on to that.
I do wonder whether it'll have any impact.
Well, it's clearly having no impact on the BBC at all, because they very definitely have taken sides. In fact, over the past couple of days, it's been some of the most irresponsible reporting I think I have ever seen. This situation is tinderbox that's happening right now, and we all have to be very careful what we do and say re the Middle East. And the BBC, when this bombing happened, this hospital bombing happened, the BBC, and one of its reporters, I'm going to name him, a guy called John Donaldson, he was out there and he said without a shred of evidence, his quote was, "It's hard to say how anyone but Israel could be to blame." And then they had, they said, the BBC said that this information, they had information, they said it came from Palestinian officials, without ever naming these Palestinian officials. Turns out it was very likely Hamas who gave them that information. So that without any verification for information that came from a prescribed terrorist group, they put that out there. Now, the BBC, what's really important here is the BBC is well respected in the Middle East. Its word is law out there. So immediately, people in the Middle East were thinking, Israel did this, before we knew.
Carol, it was a worldwide push notification.
Yes.
Essentially what Hamas was saying, going out to potentially millions of people, see this come up on their phone and think Israel's done this awful war crime.
And even though, Emily, even though the evidence now is showing that that's maybe not the case, probably almost definitely not the case, and Israel have described why it wasn't the case, why it was unlikely it was one of their bombs. There are people in the Middle East who are not believing that, because there are riots everywhere, and the chants everywhere are death to the UK, death to France. What have we done? We're trying to be as even-handed as we possibly can in this country.
Can Rishi Sunak go out there and do any good for us? This is the thing, as Carol was saying, the attitudes around this are so entrenched, more than almost any other issue in our lifetime. And this has been a period of entrenched opinions, let's be honest. Can he do any good to keep us safe here in the UK?
I think, actually, yes, he can, and that is part of this visit. It's obviously it's a symbolic thing. It's to show we stand with Israel. But actually, it is also about speaking to the Israelis, frankly, privately, calling for restraint. This is not about just going over there and kind of rallying the Israelis. This is about speaking to the Israelis as a friend, and actually what happens there impacts on us, as we have seen. So I do think it is really important that he's there, and I think we can speak as a nation frankly to the Israeli government, and I think that is really important.
Isn't it hard, though, Sam, for everyone has called on Israel for restraint, and we know why. It's very obvious why there needs to be restraint. But if it turns out that Hamas did this was one of their mortars that backfired. The people. If I was living in Israel, or even if I was a Jew living in this country, you would want your government to go hell for leather in there. You would not want them to get away with this, and that, I think, is the big problem here. Israel has always been asked to show restraint, and I'm not taking sides here, but because it is the bigger military power, and that's a fact. But you can see why the people of Israel don't want their government to show restraint.
Well, many Palestinian officials of one sort or another have been asked, what does Israeli restraint look like? What is the right reaction to having a barbaric terrorist attack committed on your people?
Just back off and say, OK.
As the only Jewish state in the region, the world.
That is a very valid point, but I think you also have to listen to the words of Joe Biden yesterday, and I don't think the visit got off to a particularly great start, but I think it got better. And I think his point is actually, we've been there, the US, we have been there, and these are the lessons we have learned.
In Afghanistan.
Yeah. After 9/11, and that, of course, you want to go hell for leather to avenge the wrongs on your nation. but actually these are the lessons the US has learned. Please look at those. And I think that is a very valid thing to say. And I'm not saying what is the right, what is restraint and what I don't know. That's not for me to say. But
when you,
important.
If you were in Israel and you're counting the dead babies and you're seeing the beheaded babies, you're seeing the children who were killed and burned, you're seeing the old people. When you've seen all that, it's very hard to want to show restraint. I mean, I'm amazed by a lot of the Jews in this country who are saying absolutely up front, we feel for the dead Palestinian, men, women and children who are innocent in all of this. We feel for it. So there is that kind of compassion, that kind of humanity is there. But I just see this getting worse, and now especially in the Middle East. I mean, there's fury, and there's fury about Europe. They've already decided we've taken sides.
Right, let's talk about a domestic issue, shall we? This is your piece in the Express today, Sam, about pensions and triple lock pensions. I know this is important to a lot of our viewers and listeners. What's going on?
And it's really important to our readers. It's the #1 issue for our readers. The triple lock is essentially supposed to take out any discussion about what the state pension rises by each year. It is pegged to 3 things. There's a minimum floor of 2.5%, or it's inflation or average earnings. And it's supposed to be a default. There's supposed to be no discussion about it.
And is it which is the highest or which is the lowest?
It's which is the highest.
Which is the highest.
So 2.5 is like a minimum. The minimum you can never get is 2.5. And so, this is supposed to take the worry out of the situation for pensioners. What has happened under this government is every year now we have this question mark over will the triple lock be honoured. Now, it's not a lock if you don't
lock it.
Yes, exactly. It's no longer a lock because the discussion happens now every year. Rishi Sunak suspended it during COVID. I think a lot of people understood that we were in exceptional times and gave him the benefit of the doubt on that. But to then keep going through this, so there's a question mark. I'll keep it very quick, but basically there's a question mark over whether you pay it at 8.5% or 7.8%, and that depends on how you massage the figures.
And this is because we've got such rampant inflation.
It was actually this year. It's linked to wages, right? So they are looking at stripping out a particular bit of the wages. So you take out bonuses, so it pays at a lower level.
And that's because we had so many bonuses.
They've only ever paid it at this higher level, and so to rewrite the figures and the calculation now.
I don't understand why it's locked to average wages. Inflation, totally understand, and not to go below 2.5%. But why lock it to average wages?
Not even. I get what you're saying, but not even that. I think is the important point. The important point is we have a government trying to diddle pensioners, and it really hacks me off. 2 million pensioners in this country rely solely on the state pension, and that is about 800 quid a month. Let any of us try and live on that. It's impossible. You can't do it. And it's 2 million live on the state pension alone. But there's this narrative developing that somehow we're treating the pensioners better than young people who are missing out. No, I'm sorry. Pensioners have paid into the system all of their lives. This is their entitlement. It's not a gift. It's not a present. It's what they're entitled to. And when you have train drivers on 68 grand getting a 9% deal, why the hell shouldn't a pensioner get an 8.5%?
It really feels like there's this sense that pensioners should just be grateful.
Yes.
Right? You should just be grateful for what we're giving you, whereas younger people who might be on benefits are being told they have a right to that without showing gratitude.
Just 2 good years in the entirety of the triple lock, which came in I think 2010. 2 good years is not enough to re-evaluate this formula.
Last year, Sam, it was 3.5.
Yeah,
that's what we got.
That's when they suspended
it. Went up. But importantly, at that point, that was the time when food went up by 15% and fuel doubled.
But the point Rishi Sunak has to remember here, and the Chancellor, is this will save them about £600 million, which is nothing. But it will create enormous bad feeling among the one group of people who actually still vote for them. And if they're prepared to throw away that goodwill for the sake of £600 million, do not work.
Do you know what I hate? It is the intergenerational anger that comes from the pension triple lock, or it's used to sort of show, as you said, that younger people are hard done by. I think it's very difficult. There may be some arguments to means test it a little more.
I had an argument with a young person yesterday who was on this station lot, Mr. Butterworth.
I was about to say Butterworth.
Not any names. But he calls a pensioner a millionaire if they live in a house that is worth £1 million. He's not getting the fact that they worked all their lives to pay for that house. And the suggestion there is that, you get get to 65, but sell that house and go and live in a much smaller one
Yeah.
because you don't deserve to have that house, and it's not fair on young people.
Yeah.
Let young people get their own houses. They've got a whole lifetime to work to get houses. The elderly...
We need more houses, though, Carol.
Well, we do
It's
need more
extremely
houses. We do,
difficult.
but don't punish the elderly because of that.
And we need more work ethic. Call me old-fashioned, but we do need more work ethic.
OK, I'll work harder.
Those pensioners, you and Patrick Christie's couldn't put in any more hours on this channel. But, you know, I think those pensioners, like you say, Carol, you forget the lifetime of work that those people
and
worked
putting in to the system.
long hours all their lives to have that. I don't resent them a penny of those
people who are claiming unemployment
houses.
benefit and have been for 30 years can't be bothered to get a job. You know, who talks about taking their money away?
We need more houses, though, so that young people feel they can have aspiration to own, because at the moment, you know,
we do need
pretty
more houses,
bleak
and in fact we're going to have Liam Halligan on in the second half of the show, because there is an interesting statistic actually about housing and how little we've got to have and what that might mean by about 2030. Should we have a quick touch on the Bibi Stockholm? Asylum seekers they're going to be welcomed back today, Sam. This is a success story. How many do you think they're going to take this time? More than the 20 odd that got on there last time.
You know, I think this is. I mean, I think people really need to see this actually working in action, because it's been such a farce to have a few people go on and then immediately taken off, and it's taken months to clean out some pipes on this thing.
I know.
It just seems absolutely baffling. So I think they've really got to make this work now, otherwise...
Well, the story today, Sam, is that some of them are refusing to go on because they're traumatised at the idea of drinking the water. I mean, these are supposed to be people that have fled war and persecution. They've probably been living in tatty old tents across in Calais, and they're saying they can't drink the water on Bibi Stockholm. Please, get it.
Carol, some might say you're heartless.
No, I'm not being heartless at all. You've seen the Bibi Stockholm. It's quite luxurious. In fact, lots of homeless people in this country have actually told me that when they were homeless, they would love to have lived on that place and given their right arms.
Well, if you remember, when initially, look, there we're seeing some rooms. If you're listening on the radio, I mean, it's like a decent sort of basic, you know, student accommodation, proper telly on the wall and everything. You know, you've got security going in. If you remember last time, there were so few people got on the boat in the first place, but actually once they arrived, then more people started coming in. It was almost like they were ringing their mates and going, "It's got a gym.
It's all right.
We've got a cinema room. We've got a fantastic canteen." And then more and more people arrive. So we'll just have to see what happens today. And then obviously they have the listeria.
So embarrassing for the government if something else crops up that means they have to take them all off again.
And I'm sure something will. I'm sure. I wouldn't be surprised.
Dear.
Well, yes.
Farcical.
I have very little faith in this as being any sort of resolution, Sam. Do you?
Well, I think, you know, we're paying £8 million a day for accommodation. And that has to stop. I mean, that has to stop.
Yeah.
4-star hotels, people will not put up with that. So, you know, they need to make this work.
This Sam is costing 25 grand a day to stand empty. Just to stand empty. That's what.
Oh my God!
And they've spent something like 600 grand on fixing it. So it's cost a lot of money already.
We are a very generous country, aren't we? When you look at it like that and you realise, and we're accused of not taking enough people, but when you look at these numbers, Sam, we are doing our bit.
Yeah. I think the government must have. It must have some success with the Bibi Stockholm. It must have a flight take off to Rwanda.
Yes.
Otherwise, people will lose faith in it. In its ability to deal with these issues, but it's also got a kind of brewing problem with legal migration and the net figures there. I think this is going to be such a key issue at the election that they've got to find some way of.
Yeah,
it will be. Well, thank you very much, Sam Lister and Carol Malone. In the next few moments, we're going to be going straight to Westminster to get political reaction from our political editor, Christopher Hope. We're GB News.
Hello, Storm Babet stays with us over the next 24 hours. We have a red warning coming into force later on Thursday for eastern Scotland. The rain is going to intensify over the next 24 hours. And it's all down to this area of low pressure and these persisting weather fronts. This is where we'll see that red warning come into force later on Thursday. But as well as that, we've also got amber warnings in force for rain and wind across parts of Scotland, yellow warnings as well across more widely across Scotland and northeast England. The rain you can see really intensifying through Thursday afternoon, piling in with gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. Elsewhere, some heavy showers, some thunderstorms, very mild for the time of year, 18 or 19 degrees. Not much sunshine out there, though. And as we head through Thursday evening, that's when the red warning comes into force for eastern areas of Scotland. We could see as much as 250 millimetres of rain. That's a dangerous amount of rain. It will cause widespread flooding and there will be some disruption. Do stay tuned to the forecast. Further wet weather piles in across eastern and southeastern parts of England and Wales as we go through the course of the night. It stays mild overnight, but further warnings remain in place for the next few hours. And then through Friday morning, we continue to see this very wet weather pushing its way in. It'll continue to give some quite heavy rain for the Pennines, easing somewhat from Scotland, but it stays very unsettled. Further heavy showers then pushing across southern areas. Limited brightness here. It stays very changeable for the next few days. Bye-bye.
Still to come this morning, power cuts, travel disruption and a risk to life. I think we'll find something hopefully nice to talk about as well. Scotland is bracing itself for Storm Babet. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 19th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Emily Carver this morning.
Yes, now, red weather warning. Scotland braces itself as Storm Babet arrives. Our reporter Tony Maguire is at the scene.
If that is actual pictures...
Hello. Good morning. Certainly, it's something of a lovely day we're having here, but not particularly the most pleasant topic. Some severe weather warnings, travel disruption, power cuts, and much more coming over the course of the day.
Oh, poor Tony. If you're listening on the radio, it's worth switching on your TV to see that weather. Now, back on the barge, the Home Office is expected to return asylum seekers to the Bibby Stockholm barge moored in Dorset. Our reporter, Jeff Moody, has the very latest.
Yes, I'm going to be live in Portland throughout the day here on GB News when the first of the coach loads of refugees is due to return to the barge at around midday today.
And a social housing crisis. By 2030, 150,000 children will be homeless and living in B&Bs and other emergency accommodation.
We're going to be talking to Liam Halligan about that statistic, and surely, with that kind of warning, we can do something about it by 2030.
You'd have thought so, Bev.
You would have thought so, but, you know, nothing surprises me anymore. Get in touch with us this morning on email, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at GBNews. First, though, here's the very latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has met with families in Israel whose loved ones are being held hostage by Hamas following the attacks on October the 7th. A social media post shows Rishi Sunak hugging a woman with the caption, "To have a child taken from you is a parent's worst nightmare." At a meeting earlier, he told President Isaac Herzog he had not just a right but a duty to restore security to the country. He's also met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's understood Mr Sunak will be pressing for the route into Gaza to be open for the delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the safe exit of those trapped in the territory. Well, the conflict has now killed more than 4,900 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. The United Nations warns that life-saving aid for those trapped in Gaza is now critical. Benjamin Netanyahu has said he won't stop food, water and medicine from being delivered to civilians in the south from Egypt. But he says there'll be no humanitarian aid from Israel without the return of hostages. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says Palestinians in Gaza are being exploited by Hamas.
I think we've got to recognise that the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinian people. We've seen people in Gaza over the last 30, 40 years, not just murdered when Hamas took power in 2008-9, but actually since then being exploited in the most horrific ways. We've seen children being forced to dig these tunnels that sadly have been dug across the entire region. We've seen individuals who have stood against Hamas in various different ways being murdered.
Well, the Foreign Secretary's had talks with his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. James Cleverly visited Israel last week and will travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to try and seek a peaceful resolution. The UK says the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages and allow humanitarian access to Gaza. In other news, French President Emmanuel Macron has attended the funeral of a teacher who was stabbed in a suspected Islamist attack. Dominique Bernard was stabbed to death 6 days ago in the northern city of Arras. Macron and his wife spoke to his family ahead of the ceremony, also attended by Bernard's students, each carrying a white rose. The suspect's under formal investigation for murder, and France has been on its highest state of alert since the attack. Back here, asylum seekers are set to return to the Bibby Stockholm later. A number of people were taken off the barge after deadly bacteria was found on board more than 2 months ago. Food supplies have now been delivered and letters sent to asylum seekers confirming their return. The Home Office says all necessary tests have now been completed. The Met Police has described new facial recognition technology to catch prolific shoplifters as game-changing. In a pilot of the new software, 12 retailers provided images of 30 of the worst offenders. When compared with the force's custody shots, almost half came up as positive matches. Those offenders are now being investigated with a view to build criminal cases. The software uses biometric measures of a person's face, even if it's partly covered. And an investigation has been launched into Welsh Water after the company admitted illegally spilling untreated sewage. Natural Resources Wales says it's examining the severity and frequency of permit breaches by the water company. Welsh Water says between 40 and 50 of its wastewater treatment plants are currently operating in breach of their permits. One of the worst performing plants is in Cardigan in West Wales. And Greta Thunberg has taken to the streets in a protest that started outside JP Morgan in London this morning, demanding the bank stop funding fossil fuels. And these are live pictures of that protest in London. The climate activists joined Fossil Free London at the entrance in Canary Wharf this morning. It follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair outside a meeting between oil executives where Ms Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others and charged with a public order offence. And the Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning for heavy rainfall and severe wind for parts of Scotland. Storm Babet is forecast to cause severe flooding and risk to life from 6 p.m. this evening until tomorrow. Angus and Aberdeenshire are expected to be the worst affected areas, with some schools closing. Power outages are expected along with train cancellations until Saturday. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Emily and Beth.
Very good morning. It's 11:07. The Prime Minister has arrived in Israel for a two-day visit before heading to regional capitals. What can he achieve?
Yes, joining us to discuss this is GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Christopher, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Tell us what's the latest from this trip and what is he trying to achieve?
Well, so far in Israel, the PM, Rishi Sunak, has met with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. They crucially talked about the work they're doing entirely to support the release of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Of course, we know that there are seven British nationals died, 9 more are missing, so as many as 9, we don't know that figure, but as many as 9 British nationals could be held in Gaza. So that's that conversation so far. There's also been talks about ensuring that the Israel can defend itself in line with international law. That's what the UK has been stressing with Israel. Of course, when this invasion happens, if it does happen, maybe over the weekend, then the behaviour of Israeli troops in Gaza will be so important to how they maintain public support around the world for their action there. So far, that's the meeting. We're waiting for the meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I should say we're not with him. He's taking no journalists with him, the Prime Minister, not a single one with him. So we're relying on what Number 10 tells us is happening out there, which is unusual, but is also maybe a reflection of the security status in the Middle East at the moment.
And Chris, you were obviously aware of PMQs yesterday, and the Prime Minister got, a lot of attention on this issue. What did you make of that first PMQs back after having the break for the conferences?
Yeah. Well, it was very subdued, Bev, wasn't it? After you and I were able to be lucky enough to, and Emily, of course, to be at the party conferences when it was back to kind of, what will they do if the Labour wins the election, if the Tories can hang on, all that kind of thing. But it was much more subdued. It was one of those moments, I think, when the House of Commons is at its best, when everyone is correctly paying tribute to those who died and trying to make sure the right message comes out from the House of Commons, the elected chamber of this country.
OK, all right, thank you, Chris. From a very calm-looking London there at the moment, there at Westminster, but of course we are facing a rare red weather warning. Red lorry, yellow lorry, this rare
Not enough bad news, is there?
Warning, stating that a risk to life has been issued for parts of Scotland as Storm Babet arrives today.
Yes, well, the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has warned against all but essential travel with extensive flooding and road closures expected in Aberdeenshire and Angus. I have family up in Aberdeenshire, so I hope they're OK.
Well, if you're watching, do let us know. I'm sure you are. If you're Emily's family, why would you not be watching? We've sent Tony Maguire up there. We saw a clip of Tony in the menu. Now, I was being a little bit flippant because if you're a regular viewer, you know, sometimes I think we make a lot of fuss out of what is just weather and that we've been coping with weather for years. And then we saw the picture of Tony Maguire being battered with his umbrella in an absolute sort of downpour, a sort of typhoon of rain that is going on up there. So I won't be quite as flippant.
Well, I hope lives aren't actually at risk, but we'll find out more when Tony appears. He might have been blown away by the wind.
You've been getting in touch with us at home this morning as well. Keep your emails coming to us. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email. And we were discussing whether you think Rishi Sunak should be going over to the Middle East. Should he be in Israel now? What is the significance of this? We've discussed this morning. Actually, to some extent, it is quite symbolic. I thought, actually, that Arlene Foster was very informative on this in the first half an hour of the show and saying that at these times, we do need to have diplomacy behind the scenes, if nothing else, to keep a humanitarian corridor open.
Yeah, and there are some people who agree with you, Bev, or agree with the idea that perhaps it's not the best use of his time and the best use of money and resources. Others think it's essential in terms of solidarity.
We were dying to talk to Tony Maguire. Now, we don't think he's been completely drowned in that rain, but we can't get hold of him just at this moment. But we are going to try and get hold of him. But we have also another awesome reporter for us out and about this morning. The Home Office is, of course, set to return asylum seekers to the Bibby Stockholm that is moored in Portland, Dorset.
Yes, the 39 people accommodated on the barge were, of course, evacuated. That was after discovering Legionella bacteria in the water supply.
So let's go to the southwest and to our Southwest of England reporter, Jeff Moody, on a very calm-looking day there in terms of the weather, Jeff, but not, I imagine, in terms of the mood.
Absolutely not. Well, thank you for the awesome. I appreciate that. Yes, we've got about an hour now until the first coach load of asylum seekers arrives back from the Bibby Stockholm. We're not sure exactly how many coach loads there will be, but there's certainly going to be a few. They're coming up from Devon, South Devon, where they've been housed in hotels over the last few months. Since August, when their last attempt to board the Bibby Stockholm happened. Last time they were here for just 4 days, as we know, before this Legionella outbreak broke out, and they came off the barge pretty soon afterwards. Since then, there's been all of these legal wranglings. The Mayor of Portland, Caroline Parks, went to the High Court to try and overturn the use of the barge for asylum seekers. That was kicked out of court fairly swiftish. The problem with Legionellas is now, says the Home Office, solved. And so today is the day. Today is the day when the Home Office tries again to fill asylum seekers onto the Bibby Stockholm. They're going to be met by demonstrations here. It's not going to be as ferocious and as angry as demonstrations we've seen here in the last few weeks and months. These are the stand up to racism people who have got plenty of banners saying no to the prison barge. That view, of course, is echoed by the asylum seekers themselves. 39 of them, when they were here last time, wrote an open letter to the Home Office saying that they felt like they were on a prison barge. They didn't want to come back. They didn't want to be here at all. They talked about how their mental health suffered during just those 4 days that they were on board. But on board they will be. They received a letter a couple of days ago to say that they will be returning to the Bibby Stockholm, and they have no choice in that matter. So en route they are. As I say, they should be here around midday-ish, and there's going to be lots of welcome packs that are going to be dished out to them. The people from Stand Up to Racism have been making these welcome packs for the last few weeks and months. They contain all sorts of things from notepads to postcards to information on helplines that they can get in touch with should they need to. As I say, not much happening at the moment, but we should be expecting the first of the buses at around midday today.
Jeff, when you talk to the people like the Stand Up to Racism crowd, is their objection just of the standard of accommodation that's being provided? Do they ever have a solution that they might want to fill us in on that might be more cost effective and perhaps also more luxurious?
Well, you know what? When I talk to the Stand Up to Racism lot, they don't talk back to me. This is part of the problem. They don't want to engage with GB News in any shape or form. They look straight through me. So you will notice that they are here now having media interviews with all of the other media, BBC, ITV, Sky, but they won't be talking to us, unfortunately, because they believe that we have given too much prominence to the other side of the argument than no to the barge side. But listening to what they say to other people, yes, that is exactly right. They say that the main issue is that refugees should be treated with more dignity and more respect. They talk about the fact that refugees have come on a dangerous sea crossing, not just from France to the UK, but in the initial part of their journey too, that putting them on water is cruel in itself, some form of torture, and they're saying that they really shouldn't be packed onto a barge with so many people per room. But that's as far as I can tell you from their opinion, because they won't talk to me directly.
Yeah, so that doesn't seem to be a solution. That's a criticism of the barge. I guess the question then, as Bev alluded to, is where would you put them in instead? I can understand why people don't think the barge is the best type of accommodation, but when you've got thousands coming across the channel, every month, where are they supposed to go? More hotels? Is Jeff still with us?
That's right, and then of course there's the cost issue. You know, I am, yes. I mean, they talk about how this is supposed to save money, it's saving taxpayers' money, but it's cost £8 million so far, and they've only been in here. And then they were taken straight out again. So it is not proving as successful in terms of saving money as the Home Office would like.
OK, thank you so much, Jeff. Do keep us posted, won't you, on events down there as one of our awesome reporters. Thank you. Do you know what, Emily? Do you know what I find amazing? If you feel so strongly about any issue, I don't care what it is, whether it's about immigration or anything, and a media outlet gives you the opportunity to have your voice heard, what is it that stops you? Those people down there that stand up to racism that won't come on GB News. If you think that we are part of the problem, then come and tell us we're part of the problem.
Yeah, but you know what? You know the Welsh Parliament, GB News, is now banned from their internal television system. I do wonder if it's because GB News has been highlighting migrant hotels in Wales and some of the reaction from local communities. I think, you know, they don't like the fact that we look into issues that other broadcasters choose to ignore.
The very fact that Stand Up to Racism will talk to every other media outlet there would suggest that every other media outlet is echoing what they want to hear, and they want to exist in an echo chamber, whereas allow a media organisation like us to represent both sides of the story, because that's all we ever try to do. And that sort of lack of debate and lack of free speech, that sort of censorship.
But you know what? I bet there are people who want to talk to Jeff, but they probably feel peer pressure not to, because look at Jeff. He's a perfectly friendly, fantastic journalist there, wanting to hear what people have to say.
He might be Moody by name, but it is not by nature. So if you are down there, have a chat to Jeff Moody on behalf of GB News. You're always welcome here. We let everybody have their say. Right, sadly, we cannot let Tony Maguire have his say. I'm blaming the weather. We can't get the connection to him. Up in Scotland, we saw the clip of him with his GB News umbrella being absolutely battered by the weather. We are going to carry on trying to get hold of Tony, but for now we have lost him. Right, still to come this morning, according to new research, 150,000 children will be homeless by 2030. What can the government do to stop this? You are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Right, it is 11:22. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Bev Turner.
Right, so by 2030, 150,000 children will be homeless and living in B&Bs and other emergency accommodation, according to new research from the National Housing Federation.
Yes, Britain is now in the midst of a housing emergency, says the boss of one leading housing association. That's a theme at the heart of Keir Starmer's speech last week at Labour conference. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has this report for us.
On this Bedfordshire building site, dreams are being made of a safe and permanent home. This project is led by Grand Union, a not-for-profit housing association. They're building 40 social housing units here for low-income and vulnerable families, paying below market rents. But with over 1 million households on the council house waiting list, these much-needed homes barely scratch the surface.
I think when we have 150,000 children sleeping in temporary accommodation, and it's not really temporary because some of it has lasted over 10 years, then that is an emergency. We're damaging people's futures.
This Keir's photo.
For Ian and Cheryl Jarvis, social housing became their only option when their daughter Keris was diagnosed with hydrocephalus. Keris, unable to walk or talk, life in a 7th floor flat became impossible for this close-knit family.
We were paying over the odds for privately renting. So even though we had 2 wages at the time, once Keris came along,
the wages started to dwindle because we were needing to be more out of work. So then you
to look after
the daughter because she was always in hospital visits.
Yeah.
So it just became too expensive. Then if we'd have carried on trying to be in the private side, we would have been probably worse off than we were. We'd been flat on our faces.
By 2030, the National Housing Federation estimates 1.5 million low-income and vulnerable households will be on the waiting list for affordable social housing. That's a third more than today. As a result, 150,000 children will be living in temporary accommodation, such as bed and breakfasts and emergency hostels. That's 6 children in every school in the country.
Essential, we can't shower any other
For Ian and Cheryl, given Keris's special needs, Grand Union has been a lifesaver.
I dread to think where we would be, if we'd be together or separated. We would, if enabled to be living with our daughter, because she needs a lot of equipment and she needs a 24-hour care. So yeah, I don't know where we'd be without Grand Union and being in this house.
Elsewhere in Bedfordshire is Grand Union's newly built Chamomile Gardens, sheltered accommodation for social tenants aged 55 plus. Jackie recently lost her leg in an accident. She says living here is a godsend, but social housing is a lottery.
There seems to be an area where some people are struggling to get anywhere and others just seem to be lucky. I don't know how other way to explain it.
With the media focused on home ownership, Aileen Evans says the need for more social housing is often ignored. But the alternative is the state subsidising vulnerable families to rent on the open market.
Successive governments need to invest in social housing. Otherwise, we will consign families to lives where their futures are stolen, and we'll have a burgeoning housing benefit bill that will cost the taxpayer far more than building social housing in the first place.
While Rishi Sunak failed to mention housing in his party conference speech, Keir Starmer put more homes at the centre of his offer to voters. This could be the issue that decides the next general election. Liam Halligan, GB News, in Bedfordshire.
So thank you for that, Liam. Are you joining us now to discuss this? We've got this warning about the fact that we're not going to have enough houses. So that means surely that politicians are going to leap into action and build a load more houses.
As if. Look, we often focused on houses for people to buy, particularly young people. We often focus on the British dream of home ownership. But, you know, at the sharp end of the housing market, where there is real vulnerability, low-income families, human misery, you've got what we call social housing. That's social housing, it's council housing, and it's housing associated by not-for-profit housing associations like Grand Union that I was just featuring there. And the National Housing Federation, that's the umbrella group for all housing associations, and their research is pretty alarming that the council house waiting list is going to go up by a third by 2030. But you know what? In the last 40 years, there have only been 3 years when we've built more social housing than we've demolished or sold. So the stock of social housing is getting smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. And I like free markets. I like people to be able to buy their own homes. I grew up in a first-generation home ownership family, and it transformed my parents' lives. But I'm really mindful that there's a whole world out there where people, good council housing is fantastic. It gives security of tenure. You get a lower rent. It means people with lower income jobs can live among the community, certainly in city centres and so on. It makes things work. But then you've also got this other area where, because there isn't enough social housing, enough council housing, the state pays private landlords to put up social tenants. And the conditions of that housing is often terrible because, frankly, the state just doesn't want to know. Because it doesn't want to unearth problems.
Don't we actually have more social housing, though, as a proportion of housing stock in this country than elsewhere in Europe? Is not the issue that we just have a lack of supply across the board?
Well, in 1979, 1 in 3 families in the UK were in social housing. It's now 13%.
1 in 3?
Yep, 1 in 3 in 1979. It's now 13%, so it's fallen a lot. And my instincts are perhaps along the lines of yours, Emily. Why do we need I'm not saying you're saying that, but surely the market can provide. But there are many families, because they're vulnerable or they're just in jobs that don't command enough money, the economy produces those kind of jobs. They still want to work. They're still dignified people. They can raise kids. You know, Ian Jarvis there and his family. What an amazing family. Incredibly dignified people.
But Liam, we have sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation in central London where there is social housing that people have been sitting in for decades, passed it down to generations, in areas where, if that was on the private market, it would be out of reach of most people on very good jobs and incomes. What's going on there?
Well, the model is that you want some people living in certain parts of the country so they can do jobs that need to be done and that they want to do for money. I mean, this is... But the much bigger picture is that across the country there is a massive social housing waiting list. Across the country, there are some housing associations that are doing a good job, but some that aren't. New figures out from the government's housing ombudsman shows a record number of complaints of severe maladministration, up from 31 to 131 last year. That's where families' health has been undermined seriously by the state of their housing. This is Dickensian. And the really big picture for those of us who are interested in, you know, the government running fiscal policy properly and value for money, the really big issue, Emily, is that because we don't have enough social housing, the state has to pay housing benefit to pay the rent for people to have often not good private sector accommodation. That housing benefit bill, Emily, it's £25 billion a year.
So it's a false economy.
It's absolutely massive. So we should be shifting the subsidy for housing at the lower end of the market, with huge respect, from benefits and into bricks. If the state builds those homes or facilitates the building of those homes, then that's on the state's balance sheet, and that's much, much cheaper, better value for money, better for the families concerned, for the state to actually own the housing, and or for the state to lease the housing long-term from private sector providers who are regulated. This is how it works in other countries. Very few other countries spend tens of billions of pounds equivalent a year building buy-to-let empires for private sector landlords with social tenants. It's really, really bad use of state money.
Really is. Liam, thank you so much. Right, still to come this morning.
To Azkaban, J.K. Rowling has said she is willing to go to jail amid fears.
Say that again.
To Azkaban.
What is Azkaban?
It's a very well-known something from Harry Potter, OK? something. It's a prison. It's a prison in Harry Potter. So she's willing, J.K. Rowling this is, willing to go to jail amid fears misgendering someone could become a crime in Scotland.
And no longer working. The recent air traffic control meltdown was made worse by computer engineers working from home. Funny that. That and much more after your morning's news with Rhiannon.
It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has met with families in Israel whose loved ones are being held hostage by Hamas following the attacks on October the 7th. At a meeting earlier, he told President Isaac Herzog he had not just a right, but a duty to restore security to the country. He's also met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's understood Mr. Sunak's pressing for the route into Gaza to be open for the delivery of humanitarian aid, as well as the safe exit of those trapped in the territory. The conflict has now killed more than 4,900 people on both sides as it enters its 13th day, and a warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The conflict has now killed, as I say, more than 4,900 people on both sides, and the Gaza Health Ministry says over 12,000 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. The UN warns that life-saving aid for those trapped in Gaza is now critical. An investigation has been launched into Welsh Water after the company admitted illegally spilling untreated sewage. Natural Resources Wales says it's examining the severity and frequency of permit breaches by the water company. Welsh Water says between 40 and 50 of its wastewater treatment plants are currently operating in breach of their permits. And Greta Thunberg has taken to the streets of London in a protest that started outside JP Morgan, demanding the bank stops funding fossil fuels. The climate activist joined Fossil-Free London in Canary Wharf. This follows Tuesday's protest in Mayfair outside a meeting between oil executives where Mr Thunberg was arrested along with 26 others charged with a public order offence. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2110 and €1.1582. The price of gold is £1,610.75 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,533 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come this morning, former Home Secretary Sajid Javid has called for foreign nationals committing acts of anti-Semitism or other hate crimes in the UK to have their visas revoked. Do you agree with that? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. It is 11:38. We have got Carol Malone and Sam Lester back in the studio with us this morning.
We do indeed.
Another all-female panel in the absence of Andrew Pearce. I don't think he'll mind.
Well, he can't, can he?
No, he can't mind.
He won't mind, but I believe we've got a spot of weather.
Oh.
Do we?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well,
Not yet.
there is a spot of weather coming over the horizon, and in fact, it stops us talking to Tony Maguire up in Scotland. But let's talk about J.K. Rowling, shall we? Right.
Yes.
So she has said, Carol, that she will happily do 2 years in jail if a future Labour government made it a hate crime to call someone by the wrong pronouns. So she means if you came in here and said, Bev, today I am a man and I want you to call me Mr. Malone, and I said, Carol, don't be ridiculous, you are Mrs. Malone, that could end me in jail.
I'm going to be in the next cell to her. Because, but this is, you know, I never used to like J.K. Rowling until she got on, until she started supporting women's rights in this way. And now I love her, and I think she's one of the bravest people on the planet. She said the other day, you know, I'm happy to keep taking the hit on this women's rights thing, and she said, because I can afford to.
Yeah.
They can't cancel me. Although they did try, the trans activists, they did try to get our publishers to drop her, but the publishers were too smart. You know, she's worth £1 billion, so she can take them on. And what she's basically said is, you know, I'm not going to call a trans woman a woman. I'm just not going to do it ever. And, you know, when I hear the Labour Party, this is what they're going to bring her. They're going to make you serve jail time if they think you have misgendered someone. So I think Starmer, I love it when he does this stuff, because I think, you know, you're single-handedly wrecking your chance of winning the election, because he doesn't understand that his core voters will think he's an idiot. They'll think this is completely and utterly stupid. They know what a woman is, and they're not going to have the likes of Keir Starmer or the elites in the Labour Party telling them otherwise.
But the fact that they would do this, Sam, after, well, the prison issue, very much taking down Nicola Sturgeon, at least in part. Why make this a point?
I mean, actually, Keir Starmer shifted his position significantly after that case, because he saw quite how badly that could go for the party. This isn't a formal proposal. It's something that's been mooted. You wonder if this is people in the Labour Party floating this just to see what kind of reaction would be. It would be crackers to do it, because essentially, if you went down this road, well, first of all, if you put this in your manifesto, so many women will just back away from you in droves. But secondly, if you actually went through with it, you would create, you know, martyrs. It would be a ridiculous proposal. Also, we haven't got prison places to put women in.
That's true.
There's no space for...
But I'll bet you they'd find one, Sam.
They would.
Someone who,
I guess the counter to this, just to provide some balance on this one, is I guess they mean if you misgender someone with spite and hateful for hateful reasons. So if you know, were trying to belittle someone who is trans.
It's what they regard as spite. You know, if a trans woman said to me that I had to come home, I would say, no, I'm sorry, that's not my belief. That is your belief, and live your best life as that, but it is not my belief. Because that's what the trans thing is. It's a belief system.
I wouldn't. The thing is, on an individual level, I still would respect the pronoun that somebody would want me to call them on an individual level.
That's just being polite. And
that's what I mean.
That's being polite and civilised. I don't think there's a problem with that. This is about, do you have to recognise somebody who calls themselves Isla Bryson, who is dressed in leggings, he's clearly a man, who has been convicted of 2 rapes and wants to be put in a women's prison. Do you, you know, is it a hate crime to call that person
But Lisa Nandy
a
said
man?
very recently that she would still support putting a trans woman in a female prison. Now, we saw the uproar of all that. We saw that was the beginning of the end for Nicola Sturgeon, that her insistence of doing that.
It really was.
And yet Lisa Nandy still says she would do that. And J.K. Rowling has taken her on. That's what...
And this is the thing, actually. This actually... Although Keir Starmer has formally moved his position in the Labour Party, more people are like Lisa Nandy than not. And so people will have to weigh that up when they're coming to decide who they cast their vote for. And also, I would say on the spite point, actually... where is the consideration for the men who are attacking women day in, day out, calling them TERFs or worse? Where is the consideration about the misogyny, the hatred towards women? Exactly. It doesn't even factor.
Well, Labour have an answer for that too. They want to make misogyny a hate crime. It seems that everything will be a hate crime, yes.
And the prison, they're going to have to build 10 more...
Just what the police need, eh?
Yeah, that's just... But they don't... You know, the thing about Labour, it never ceases to amaze me, they don't seem to understand their core... what's the word?
Their electorate.
Their core voters. They seem to have lost touch with them. They're listening to a bubble that live and work around Westminster. They're not listening to the people in the Red Wall. They're not listening to what I call ordinary, decent working people. They're not listening to them and their fears about this. And they're not listening to women, more importantly, and their fear over the erosion.
And it was the fact that somebody had tweeted, trans women are women. She retweeted it and said no. Yes. And then it got into a conversation. She'd happily do 2 years if the alternative is compelled speech and forced denial of the reality and importance of sex. Bring on the court case, I say. It'll be more fun than I've ever had on a red carpet.
I mean, J.K. Rowling, she does not need to wade into this fight. She could be living a very quiet life, having a nice life of luxury. But she's doing this because it is a strongly, strongly held belief, and she wants to fight for women who cannot do this.
I think she's, as we've all sensed, the political wind has changed on this. So she now feels empowered and emboldened.
But she's helped change it. She helped change it.
If it hadn't been for her and Sharon Davis, who they have tried to cancel, almost did.
Talking of wind, we have to go to the weather, actually, now. We're just going to let you know what's happening. It's an important day for weather. Here it is.
Surprise. It's a different weather forecast. It's a Yorkshire ray of sunshine. Michelle Dewberry here to wish you, Beverly Turner, yes, your secret is out, a very happy birthday.
Happy birthday to my gorgeous girlfriend, Bev Turner.
Hey, girl, happy birthday. You're catching me up.
Beverly, happy birthday. Love you loads. Have a brilliant day.
Happy birthday, Bev. You're so old. Happy birthday for Saturday, Bev. I really hope you have a wonderful day with you and your family, and thank you for everything that you do here at GB News.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bev. Happy birthday to you.
Hi, Beverly. Good morning. Oh, that's my mum and dad. Happy birthday for this weekend. Well, Roger, who'd have thought, I'm not going to say how many years ago, that Beverly Turner wouldn't go into playgroup, cried going into school, cried going to swimming lessons, and cried when she had to go to Brownies.
It's a video for what? Bev's birthday, all right. How old is she?
Did you love it? That is so nice. Well, I'm a little bit emotional now. Thank you all so much. My poor dad didn't get a word in edgeways. That's typical. My mother, as you can see, we come from a family of chatty women.
Was good, though. She was really good.
Well, I think the point Mum was trying to make...
Is that you were crying, baby?
Is that I'm hysterical?
We know what point you were trying to make.
What she's trying to make, which she's made before, is that I was always very, very, very shy, and I wouldn't ever speak in public, and I think I wouldn't do anything, really. So the point of my mum was making, and there she is talking on the telly. Thank you all so much. It is my 50th on Saturday. I do not mind admitting it. We've got to go to Rishi Sunak. He's not wishing me happy birthday. Here he is.
You fought the Nazis 80 years ago, resolutely, and the entire world supported your action. President Biden called Hamas worse than ISIS. He's right, too. Hamas are the new Nazis. They're the new ISIS, and we have to fight them together, just as the world, the civilized world, united to fight the Nazis and united to fight Hamas. It must together now stand with Israel as we fight and defeat Hamas. This is not merely our battle, it's the battle of the entire civilized world. It's the battle of Israel, it's the battle of the moderate Arab countries, it's the battle of Western civilization, the battle of the free world, the battle for the future. We have here two forces. One is an axis of evil led by Iran through Hezbollah, Hamas, and others that want to bring back the Middle East to the Middle Ages, to an age of bondage and war and slavery and annihilation. And the other force is the forces of progress and humanity that want to push the Middle East into a world of peace and prosperity. We were on the cusp of expanding that peace, and destroying that move was one of the reasons why this action was taken. We have to resist it, and we have to win. Above all, we have to win. We have to release the hostages. You have nationals. Understand that, I know you do, that we have their children, babies, women, elderly, Holocaust survivors, and your nationals. And we have to work together in every way possible, and we're doing that, to get them back. I appreciate the fact that you also sent some military forces into the region. We discussed practical cooperation on many fronts, and I value that very much. 80 years ago, Prime Minister, the civilized world stood with you in your darkest hour. This is our darkest hour. It's the world's darkest hour. We need to stand together, and we want to win. And this is why I value your support, and the fact that you're here. We must win together. That means that this is a long war, and we'll need your continuous support. Continuous support. There'll be ups and downs. There'll be difficulties. The people here are united. They're prepared to take the necessary action. I've never seen the people of Israel as united, more united than they are now. But we need that unity across the board and continuous support as we prosecute and win this just war against the modern barbarians, the worst monsters on the planet. Thank you, Rishi, for coming here.
Well, Prime Minister, thank you for your warm words and for welcoming me to Israel. I'm just sorry to be here in such terrible circumstances. In the last 2 weeks, this country has gone through something that no country, no people should have to endure, least of all Israel, which has lived through some of the most awful scenes, the spectre of violence and terrorism every day of its existence. And I want to share the deep condolences of the British people and stress that we absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law, to go after Hamas, to take back hostages, deter further incursions, and to strengthen your security for the long term. Now, I know that you are taking every precaution to avoid harming civilians, in direct contrast to the terrorists of Hamas, which seek to put civilians in harm's way. But I also want to thank you for the support that your government has given to the families of British nationals caught up in this horror, including your efforts to release the hostages, secure their release. And I know that we will continue to cooperate, particularly with regard to the British nationals that are involved. I also say that we have seen the scenes over the past day that have shocked all of us, particularly at the hospital, and we mourn the loss of every innocent life, civilians of every faith, every nationality who have been killed. And we also recognise that the Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. The last thing for me to close on is this. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, that was very touching from Rishi Sunak there. We heard first from Benjamin Netanyahu and then Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, speaking to the media from Israel. Touching what he said, he made very clear that Britain, the UK, stands with Israel, stands with the Israeli people, but also talked about the need to help those in Gaza in terms of aid, humanitarian aid.
Having discussed this morning, Carol and Sam are still with us. Having been discussing this morning whether he should be there or not, I have to say, seeing him stand there, I was a little bit cynical about it and what benefit could it have. Seeing him stand there, Sam, on that stage with the Union Jack next to the Israeli flag, I get it now.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand why he needed to be there. That was really special.
It was, and I think also you saw the tone from Netanyahu that I think that tone is important, and it's created almost by the PM's influence and his decision to go there, to stand by them, to have these frank talks behind the scenes, and you see that reflected then in the way that Israel responds publicly, and I think that is important. And I think actually the words there about the darkest time that the UK went through 80 years ago, and how this is Israel's darkest time, and we need to be there for them. I thought that was very powerful, actually.
And you know what? It made me realise, Carol, we haven't really seen Rishi Sunak in a sort of conflict situation like this taking the lead. Of course, Ukraine was Boris every 5 minutes he was popping up there. Whereas this was I thought he was very good.
No, I thought he was very good too, and I thought Netanyahu was I thought he was conciliatory in a way that I haven't seen until now.
Yeah.
My only fear among all of that is he very clearly took a side. And I think there will be people in the Middle East where there is already anger and protests about the UK. I think that may inflame them. I don't know what else. I mean, I think he has to be there. Don't get me wrong. I think he has to be there, and I thought that was very emotional. But I can see that will inflame the other side, just as Biden's visit did.
I guess the view is that you can't appease those
everyone.
who wish you harm.
And he was clear, Emily, in saying that, you know, that the loss of every innocent life is a tragedy. He was clear about talking about Palestinian loss of life. So that is good. But my fear is that people who are entrenched against the UK, that will make them even more so.
Yeah.
That was very touching, actually. We stand with you in your darkest hour.
Yeah.
Very sombre, touching, the right tone, I
And actually, if you were watching at home and you've been watching that, particularly if you are in the Jewish community, email our inbox today and let Pip and Mark know how you felt about that, and did that, was it in some way, I wonder whether there's some sort of healing to be had moving forward, Sam. That very much felt like pouring oil on troubled waters, and I do think they got that just about right. As Carol says, we have to be, especially looking into the weekend with potentially more protests, does it inflame tensions here? That's also a concern, isn't it, for the authorities?
And I think this is the thing, isn't it? It really is impossible to say what Israel should do next, what restraint looks like, what is legitimate for them. But I think, you know, they are also very conscious of the fact that you don't want to inflame this even further. This has been the worst atrocity of our generation, and you have to find some way through this, and just blasting things is not going to actually find a solution.
The trouble is, every day,
solution, is
the
it?
numbers of the Palestinian dead, civilian dead goes up, and it's probably double that of Israelis now. And you know, I can see that inflaming tensions even. But I'm very worried about the situation. I mean, the Middle East is raging currently.
Yeah.
Tehran this morning is raging, and you just think, how are we going to? They're not going to be soothed by that, are they?
No, not particularly. Lots of you in our inbox today talking about the fact that you didn't think necessarily Prime Minister should be there, but also that you should. And let me know if that appearance there has changed your mind. Right, we've come to the end of the show for today, and also for this week. It's been lovely having you.
Thank you for having me.
Andrew Pearce will be back on Monday, and Britain's Newsroom will be back tomorrow morning at 9:30. You are with Brit.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and